going on, everyone? Darkside Phil here, and with me today is very special guest Panda Lee for another edition of the Hateful Truth video game review series, where you can get maximum truth and minimum bullshit. And today we're going to talk about a game that we actually did a co-op playthrough of, and that's why Panda Lee is joining us. I wanted to get her perspective and her opinions on this particular game. Now, this was a game that I didn't get a chance to play when it was new back in the fall, because there were just so many games coming out during that hardcore gaming season, and it is a very co-op centric game. It's a game that you would not want to play by yourself, as we're going to discuss in this review. And when we finally got to play it, I said, this would be a perfect game for someone, like Panda Lee to play with me. And so when we got a chance, we jumped right into it, and of course we were talking about Ratchet and Clank All-4-One. Now, to give a little bit of history or whatever, Ratchet & Clank is a series that's been around for quite a long time. It was very popular on the PlayStation during the 2000s.
Yeah.
And it's been a while since there's been a Ratchet & Clank game, and so when All-4-One was announced, a lot of people were really excited. But then when they actually found out the premise of the game, which is 4-player co-op, a lot of people were a little bit disappointed. Now, Ratchet & Clank has always had 2-player co-op, but the fact that this game seemed that it was going to focus primarily on the co-op aspect kind of had a mixed reaction amongst Ratchet & Clank fans, especially those who've been waiting quite a long time to play another one of these games. So, at its core, Ratchet & Clank, is a game made for co-op. And I think we actually said several times during our gameplay.
Yeah, that we wouldn't be able to play it by ourselves. Playing it one player would just be boring, I imagine. I mean, we found out that you do get an AI if you play one player, but I can't imagine if it's any good or not.
Yeah, it was. We did for literally a minute, maybe played single player to see what it was, and Clank becomes like an AI partner for you to solve some of the cooperative puzzles and probably do some of the cooperative combat during the game. But this is a game that literally shouts, "Oh, I want a friend who we can talk out how to figure out these puzzles. We can figure out what the strategy is to use on this certain boss or this certain enemy." And if you don't have that, it really is going to lose a lot of the attraction or the effectiveness of the game. So, what is it? Ratchet and Clank All-4-One. It's a game starring 4 characters. You've got Ratchet, you've got Clank, you've got Quark, who in this game has become the president of the planet, and you've got the longtime villain of the Ratchet and Clank series, Nefarious, Dr. Nefarious. And without giving out too much of the plot, even though there really isn't much of the plot,
almost no plot,
to be honest, they find themselves up against a common enemy, and so they team up, and you can pick any one of these 4 characters.
I was Clank.
You were Clank, and I was Quark for our playthrough. And primarily, it is, what the Ratchet and Clank series has been. Now, keep in mind, this is the first Ratchet and Clank game that either of us played, but that doesn't mean that I haven't seen Ratchet and Clank before.
Yeah.
You're going to be using big weapons, a variety of different weapons, including rocket launchers, regular laser pistols, grenade launchers, guns.
Critter Strike.
I was just going to say, guns that turn your enemies into, like, pigs or critters, guns that cause electrical storms, really powerful melee weapons, all kinds of stuff. A wide variety of weapons, and that really is one of the places where the Ratchet and Clank series has shined over time. So it really does, in that regard, it does strike a high note. But really, at its core, Ratchet and Clank All-4-One is all about the gameplay. It's not about following the story. The story is very silly. It's slapstick. It doesn't make a lot of sense. As you mentioned during the playthrough, there's characters who are like a really important part of the story in the beginning, disappear for the entire game, and then show up in the last minute.
Yeah.
So it's like, were they really taking this seriously? There is a twist ending in regards to what's going on and who's responsible for everything that's going on, and we won't spoil that, but it's really nothing that you're like, "Oh, I can't believe it, this is so good." It's more like,
unless you're 5, you're not going to care.
Exactly, and I really, at its core, this kind of game is really made for a younger audience. Not to say that it's not fun to jump in with someone, and play co-op of all ages, but really, primarily, you can tell the age range that they were really aiming for with this game, especially with most of the comedy being like slapstick or silly pun comedy and stuff like that. So really, what you're going to end up doing in Ratchet and Clank All-4-One is going through a wide variety of stages, including, I believe Luminopolis, which is a really cool futuristic city. There's going to be ice levels, there's going to be sea levels, there's going to be a moon stage, there's going to be cave levels, there's going to be, typical for this kind of action platformer. You're going to have every kind of variety of level, including a lot of different kinds of enemies, and also some big boss battles, which I actually thought some of the boss battles were pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then some of them, to be completely honest, were a little bit on the annoying side, where you really didn't know what you were supposed to be doing to kill the boss, and it took multiple trial and error attempts to figure out what it was you were supposed to be doing to actually be effective against those enemies. One startling thing that both of us noticed was that probably, I'd say, almost 80 to 90% of the game, the combat isn't that difficult. It's pretty much you can go right through it.
It's very lax.
And then all of a sudden, at the end, like the last hour and a half of gameplay,
it was just wave after wave of, and it wasn't even just one kind of enemy. It was like weak ones, and then it was like bigger ones, and then it was huge ones.
It's just the difficulty ramps up all of a sudden, where they really want you to. So all of a sudden, for the first time in the game, you have to learn about ammo management, weapon management. What weapon is most effective against what kind of enemy type, and it's really odd that for a majority of the game, it's been this kind of game that you can just sit there and kind of just like play through it without much challenge, and then all of a sudden, now you have to actually pay attention to what you're doing. It's kind of like a startling difficulty spike at the ending of the game. There is some variety in the gameplay. In regards to, there are some segments where you're like skateboarding or like, I don't even know how to say.
SSX.
Similar to like SSX, where you're in a snowboarding kind of a deal, or maybe you're riding a pipeline or something like that.
Tony Hawk.
It's like a third person over the shoulder kind of racing kind of deal. There's also some parts that are similar to something, I would want to say almost like Donkey Kong Country, where you have like using a jetpack and you have to dodge things like razor blades and things that are coming at you.
Yeah.
There is some variety. They made an effort here to make it so it's not just running and shooting the whole time, although probably about 80 to 90% of the time that's what you're going to be doing regardless. So really, again, this is a game where there's puzzles, there's some combat, and they try to mix it up. The puzzles are pretty simplistic, let's be honest. Most of the puzzles in the game we were able to solve fairly quickly. It's not anything where you're going to be scratching your head for a while and be like, oh, how do I solve this? It's a really big brain twister or anything like that.
Honestly, it kind of, like I said many times in the playthrough, it reminds me of Little Big Planet. It's platforming. It's that jetpack level was totally Little Big Planet. The swinging with the vine. It's a lot like it. It even has kind of a cheesy storyline ending.
Right, where it's not a serious kind of a deal. It's just like a silly kind of ending and plot. So yeah, I do see a lot of the similarities. It's an action platformer, but it's not to be taken super seriously, The one other aspect of the game that we haven't mentioned yet is the critters. And what this is that there are little like creatures. They look like animals basically.
Yeah, they're little like mixes of animals, like my favorite peacock bunny.
Right, or some really ugly ones, like just the giant
like the
heads.
Ones I let you have.
Yeah, so there's all these little animals that are hidden throughout the game. Now some of them are in plain sight. Some of them are kind of hidden off screen, and you have to find the secret area to find them. And the more that you collect, you unlock these secret stages, okay, where it's like a puzzle stage. And once you complete all of these, you unlock a robotic suit that supposedly, I guess, is going to help you in the gameplay.
Yeah, they said that the final boss you can use it on or something.
Yeah, but we never got to it. We got every piece but the last one, and it was really disappointing that the entire game, here we are, really making a solid effort to collect all these critters.
Yeah, we just missed the last
And then we
one.
just missed the last piece, and we're not even sure where that last hidden teleporter was to send us to this puzzle level to get this final piece of this mech suit. Well, unfortunately, we didn't get to do it in our playthrough.
Yeah.
So overall, Ratchet and Clank All-4-One, it's pretty much what you would expect from a couch co-op style of game. Very limited story, very limited character development. At this point, they assume you've played the other Ratchet and Clank games, you know these characters, so you don't really need too much background story or character development or anything like that. And it's more about just the raw gameplay, the cooperative style of the gameplay, which comes out in the puzzles, in the action, but to be honest, it's pretty repetitive and boring.
Yeah.
After a few hours of playing this game, it's just more of the same. And yeah, sure, you'll be fighting new enemy types, you'll be fighting bosses, and the bosses are really some of the coolest parts of the game where the game shines, but you're going to be like, oh, I have to do another repetitive level to solve more of these puzzles, I have to fight more of these enemies. And you really just kind of like, ugh.
Especially towards the end. It was the same puzzles multiple times.
And for the length that it is, and when I think about it, we basically played it for four sittings, and a sitting for us is roughly 2 to 2.5 hours. So you're talking a game that's roughly 8 to 10 hours long. A game that gets repetitive after the first couple of hours, that's a huge negative for it, okay? For me, and I think you'll probably agree with me, I think you've actually said this is a game where it's meant to be played with a friend, and it's made for co-op. If you don't play co-op, not only is it going to be boring, but you're probably not going to like this game.
Yeah, you're going to hate it.
The reason the game shines is because, okay, let's think together on how to solve this puzzle. Let's act together on how to beat this enemy.
And you can play with all your friends. It'll be silly. You can play it at your friend's house, have a little party. 4 people can jump in. I'm sure it's hilarious with 4 people.
Right, and we unfortunately, we didn't get to play it with 4 people, and it needs to be said that a lot of people were like, oh, why didn't you guys get Howard and John Rambo and all these other people over to play the game? Well, the bottom line is this. We all are individual people. We all have our own lives. We can't always coordinate our schedules to sit down and play an 8 to 10 hour game fully through. And John Rambo didn't want to play this game. I asked him months ago. Every time that we were doing co-op, I've recommended to him, gee, we could do Ratchet and Clank. He was like, nah, I don't really want to do it. So that's why he wasn't there, And even though it's sometimes ideal to play a game like this with maximum of 4 players, it's not always possible. So for what it is, when we played it 2-player, what we can say is this is a game geared towards co-op.
Yeah.
And if you like co-op games, this is going to be a relatively fun game, although it might get repetitive and boring after a while. So it's really going to depend on the experience that you have with your friends or whoever you're playing this game with, more along the lines of that rather than just focusing on the game's quality itself. For me, I think this game really is probably a rent for anyone, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, why would you want to spend $60 for a game that really is just based around repetitive gameplay, no real story? And by the way, there's no replayability really either. Why would you want to play through the game again once you beat it once?
Unless maybe to get the Rhino suit again, get it. But I don't see going back through that whole thing just for that.
Just for that, and of course you don't even know where it is, so you're going to have to keep replaying the same stages over and over just to try to find this one teleporter or whatever. Like, why is it worth it? No, in my opinion.
Definitely not.
It's not. So, Ratchet and Clank All-4-One. It's a game. If you're looking for a cooperative experience with your friends, it's fun, but it's really not great. It's especially with a lot of the other co-op games that have come out over the past couple of years. You just had Rayman Origins, which was a really outstanding one.
I love Rayman.
In 2010, at the end, you had Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is a really outstanding co-op game. There's a lot of this kind of game that have come out over the past few years that basically outshines this one. And so for me, this would be a game that if you're really dying for a cooperative experience because there's nothing else out there, it's worth a rent, but for everyone else, it's probably going to be a skip.
Yeah.
So for me, personally, well, actually, you know what? Let's ask you, what would you rate this game on a 1 to 10 scale, and what are your final thoughts on the game?
I would give it a 5 because you got to play a co-op, so it's never going to be a single player. You will be bored to death within the first few hours. Plus, it was really weird. During the gameplay, we ran into a lot of glitches.
That is true, and we haven't mentioned that.
A lot of glitches. Like, when I kept spawning on the one platform and I kept falling, we were there for like 5 minutes before I could even get out. We had health bar glitches.
We had, during the last boss fight, one of the enemies just disappeared from the screen, and we were forced to kill ourselves in order to start from the last checkpoint, because if we had quit, we would have had to start the whole boss fight over, so thank God we were able to kill ourselves and start from the latest checkpoint. So that is worth mentioning. There are a significant amount of game bugs that can hinder your experience. And the critter that was stuck in the ground. Yep, critters stuck in the wall, stuck in the ground.
Yeah, respawning on falling platforms.
So lots of those kind of issues.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to say about the game before we...
Well, yeah, there's lots of glitches. You definitely got to play a co-op. I say with the more people, probably the better. I mean,
probably because we're chaotic.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
And just be prepared for that last bit. It just gets ridiculous. It's just waves constantly. You can see in the playthrough. Just walking, wave, another wave,
and another wave. That's a good point, because for a game that seems like it's not taken that seriously, it has a silly plot, it's more like a party game where you play with your friends, all of a sudden now it gets hard at the end, and it's like, why would you have such a sharp difficulty spike? Why not? If you're going to do that, at least gradually increase, so you eventually start to realize, okay, I need to start managing my ammo. I need to start figuring out what weapons are the best against each enemy. I mean, until like 75% through the game, 75% through the game, we really hadn't even been managing weapons. Like, we were just using the regular blaster for a lot of the game, because most enemies would just go down like nothing to the regular blaster.
Yeah, especially when it got upgraded.
Right. So, really, in my opinion, Ratchet and Clank, good for couch co-op, But outside of that, it's really not worth even checking out. A lot of people who've been watching the playthrough said it really doesn't even play that much like a traditional Ratchet and Clank game. They're disappointed that this was the newest installment of the Ratchet and Clank series because they were looking for a new game at the core of the series, and they really didn't get that here. In my opinion, I did enjoy it. Let me put it this way. I did enjoy playing it as a co-op game, so I can't fault the game for doing pretty decently what it sets out to do, just be a co-op game. But in this day and age, especially when you're taking a well-known franchise like Ratchet and Clank, you should be doing more. You should be striving to do better, and really they fall flat, especially again in comparison to a lot of the co-op games that have come out in the past couple of years that have done way better.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, it's slightly above average in the fact that it is Ratchet and Clank. You do have a wide variety of weapons. You will have a lot of fun if you're playing with friends. So I give Ratchet and Clank All-4-One a 5.5. But it's just not great. It's not a game you have to run out to buy. And in my opinion, it's pretty much only worth a rent. You play it through once, 8 to 10 hours with your friends. Once you're done, and you're probably never going to play it again. It's going to be collecting dust on your shelf. Okay, so that's it for the Hateful Truth video game review series this time. I hope you've enjoyed this installment of Maximum Truth and Minimum Bullshit. And now you know a lot more about this game and whether or not you'll be interested in picking it up.
Yep.
In the future, for games that we do co-op on, we will be looking to do Hateful Truth reviews. Now keep in mind, we only do reviews on games that we beat. So a lot of people are already saying like, oh, they've played a couple pieces of Mario Party, will they be reviewing it? Well, we have to basically play the whole game, which we haven't had a chance to do.
Yeah. We
have to unlock everything, and so if there are games where we sit down and we play through the whole thing, yeah, we might do reviews, but just like with me, when I do Hateful Truth reviews solo, it's not fair to review a game until you have a chance to experience the entire game.
Yeah.
So we will be doing more of these in the future for the games that we play, but it's not going to be everything. Okay? So that's it. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time for the Hateful Truth video game review.